All right. All right, so folks, let's start here. And so, Colin, I'm going to throw it over to you, but it's pretty much spring now. Depending on whether you determine spring based on water temperatures or time of the year, I would still call this, kind of some spring conditions. Why don't you walk us through, if you're spring fishing for pike, maybe what's some of your preferred lures and maybe tactics, and if you're comfortable, talk about where, generally speaking, on a lake would you be looking?
Okay, so there's a couple things in what you're talking about here. When it's a spring, it really depends if it's right after ice out, the pike are in there, they're spawning, and so I'm always taught, when I go up north, I'm there early, I love to go up and target those big northern pike, the females, which are typically the biggest ones, in the post spawn, and they're hanging close to where they spawn. Usually they're a little sulky for a few days afterwards, but get some warm, sunny days, and water temperature starting to go up, their metabolism starting to kick over, and man, you'll see the monsters of a lake or river system in these back bays, shallow areas, weedy areas. Usually it's a combination of sand or mud. And one of the things I've learned over the years, both as a spin fisher and especially as a fly fisher, the great thing is that you're talking about pike that are 8 feet or less, and a lot of times you're going to sight fish to them. So it's really exciting time. I'd love to go up to your place sometime, Kyle, right after ice out in that 2-week window, because it must be pretty exciting. But the thing I learned was you've got to use small flies. Everyone always thinks you have to throw big lures and spinner baits, and a lot of the things I've learned over the years is that because their metabolism isn't fully engaged and the water temperatures are usually very cold still, they're hungry, but they're not going to chase the way they will when the water's a little bit warmer. So I tend to use a lot of smaller flies, let me show that like that, or that. And so I'm talking 3-4 inches, and I'm not throwing, bigger chickens like that. I've been to lakes in Northern Ontario and been fishing there. The weeds are not even coming up barely. You can see them at the bottom. And one of my favorite things to do after the post spawn, by the way, is I love going to the rivers, where the rivers are flowing into big lakes in Northern Ontario. Well, the walleye are all coming down. They've just coming back from their spawn, and all the pike go there. And you'll see them everywhere, and laying on the bottom. You think they're logs, they're so big. But I noticed that they might even follow the big fly, or they'll follow a big rapella, but they won't eat it. They're looking for small and easy and slow. If I could say the number one thing, no matter when you're throwing a fly or a lure, my piece of advice on spring fishing is slow.
Awesome. Listen, and you're talking about the creeks and the streams and things like that. I was up fishing on the Attawapiskat River 2 seasons ago, and you're absolutely right. We were right after ice out, and it was like a buffet where those rivers were coming into the bigger river, and you get the sense that the big pike were just sitting there and just having a snack bar. Kyle, take us through what you would do if you're looking at a spring pike.
Basically, right along the same lines as Colin. I mean, springtime is river mouths and between two lakes are key. Any pinch points where there's a little bit of current and the fish are going to be migrating. But water temperature is key. He is on the money with their metabolisms being slow, and we find them after they spawn, they drop off into the shallow bays, generally with a black bottom or a sandy bottom, somewhere that they're within a couple feet of water, trying to sun themselves, and we can see them, and you can toss everything at them and they're just going to turn away from it. It'll hit the water and it scares them because the metabolism in their body hasn't just adjusted to it yet. But like this year with it was a later spring, but we got in a bit later, and I did get out for a few days and we did a little bit of exploring, and we got to these warmer bays, and it started with the smaller fish chasing, and the bigger fish were still really lethargic. But within 2 days, with the heat wave that we had up here, it brought that water temperature up enough that it was almost every cast for the 2 days that we were out. Unfortunately, we never landed any monsters. We definitely seen them, but for sure we'd have to slow the presentation down. And for me, in the springtime, a sluggo or these Lunker City sinfish, just twitch it. cast it out, twitch it, bring it in nice and slow, and it seems to trigger a response. We found that the spoons, big body baits, just really had no effect. And the other one we were using was a big paddle tail, soft plastic that moves a lot of water when you can pull it really slow. You don't have to move it fast to make a lot of ruckus in the water. It seemed to be the baits that produced the best for us. This one just tore up. I mean, it's ready for the garbage, but I don't have too many more left, so I want to hold on to this one just in case. But water temperature is key, and for us, we definitely key in on the bait fish, which is suckers, and we find the bigger fish congregate at the mouth of the sucker creeks, and when the suckers drop back, they definitely enjoy having a snack. So when we're walleye fishing, every now and then, you know, they'll bite onto a walleye, and sometimes there'll still be the full tail of a sucker sticking out of its throat, and it just means that they're hungry. They're ready to go. They got to put some calories back into them.
Beauty. So, you know, Colin, you know, I had a question here that came in about, you know, when you're talking about the flies that you're choosing, are you attempting to match the hatch based on color pattern there, or are you looking to match based on size?
That time of the year, I find that trying to match the hatch doesn't seem to have the same impact it does when the water's warm, right? I'm not sure what Kyle has seen, and I'm glad you asked that question, because now I was talking about going slow. There's a fly here that somebody's called Northern Magic, and it was invented by a guy named Chip up in northern Saskatchewan. I've used long black woolly buggers, purple, black, and what do they look like? They look like a big leech. They don't look like any bait, and you fish them really slow. I was at Herstair last year, and we flew into a remote outpost. I think it was Napkin Lake. Mm-hmm. I got a 46-inch pike that was all of 25 to 30 pounds. It was a huge female, and I cast it, and I literally had just pulled it once and was sitting there talking to Bill, gave it another pull, and it hit. It was sitting there looking at the bottom. It was topping 5-6 feet of water. Jet black bottom, just like Kyle had talked about. And you would think, again, we saw small walleyes. We had seen some perch. I tried them. They weren't moving on them. But big black, and it's funny because the same color and larger sizes like this one work really, really well in the fall when the water again is really cold. Their metabolism's starting to shut down, but they're trying to put on some more food, you know, a little more poundage before the ice comes in. And these big black, but only smaller type flies, there's another one called a Murdich Minnow, works really well. You can see it's kind of chewed up. Work really, really well at this time, fish slow. So I've got the red and whites, you know, white ones like this and that, and they work, but overall my success rate with black in the spring, especially if there's any stain to the water, which in the spring you'll often get because, you know, the lakes will flip and the water will go kind of dirty for 3, 4, 5 days, or you got a lot of wind after the ice has come off and it turns everything up. This works. Black works so well for pike, and I've seen it with guys throwing lures as well. But as Kyle said, really, really slow, something that gives off lots of vibration and near the bottom. They'll eat, but they're not going to chase.
Right, so listen, I'll throw it back to you, Kyle, and then we'll talk about this because, you know, I agree, water temperature is really key. And what I found is that, and I'd like your comment on this, not every bay is equal. Like, not only do you need the color right, but it's got to be on the right section of the lake. So I'm wondering, can you comment on, you know, that north versus south versus, you know, east-west facing bay?
Scott, I kind of missed the question. I'm getting a bit of weather here right now, and it's coming down really hard. Could you repeat it for me again? Sorry about that.
Yeah, no. So folks, Kyle's actually up north in Nakina, so he's at an outpost here. So what I'm saying is, you know, we're talking a lot about the water temperature, and, you know, my experience would be, you know, when you think that sun comes up, you know, goes kind of east to south to west, and so really the north bays are often the good ones to hit. I'm wondering if you would agree with that.
I'm not so, you would think, but we find the best places are wherever the bottom is shallow and close to the creeks that produce suckers, but not very far away with that darker bottom. It's just the water that warms up first, and that's where they migrate to. They seem to post spawn. They'll just sit there for a while, and then they definitely take off to their ambush points later on. But for about 10 days, they just disappear. We figured out where they end up going. We got very good at following these fish and seeing what their patterns and characteristics are. And that's what they love to do. They love to just be on the mend. And sometimes you'll see them and you can bounce a fly, a lure, a spoon. You can throw your tackle box at them. They want nothing to do with it. It just comes right down to water temperature. Once that water temperature gets to a certain comfort zone, they're on.
Okay. Listen, we got a question here about the Mayfly Hatch. I think we're talking later in the year for the Mayfly Hatch. So we'll comment that probably in the next segment. Colin, here's a question for you. Is when you're looking at a lake, if we don't have any major water systems coming in, where do you think those pike are actually spawning? Because we know from this conversation that they're going to stage close to that spawning ground. Where is the spawning ground?
Typically, they're going to be back bays. They're going to be areas where the water temperature is going to come up because they need that for the actual spawning and laying the eggs. So I always found, the areas that are choked with weeds and shallow in the summer, and they're not really that fishable. And if you do go in there and you fish them, you're going to catch those little hammer handles. That's where they're going to be. And it's amazing because I've gone into those bays and been on the bow of a boat, and I think they're logs, and they're just laying on the bottom, not even moving or swimming around. You think they're logs, and then you go, oh, that thing's got eyes, and you realize the thing's that wide across at the head. So that's the one thing. When you're talking about the direction, I mean, obviously they might favor, or you might have more active fish in a bay that's getting more sun based on the time of the year. And that can have a factor, but just like Kyle said, I think there's a combination of things here. They like to have the deep water nearby for security, or oftentimes they're not that far from where there's some sort of inflow or outflow, and especially if they got the white suckers or facsimile in there, because they're over there right away, because it's not too far after they spawn that the white suckers start coming in. And I want to actually mention something about that. I had the opportunity to fish with my daughter a lake, and they had this area where there was an inflow, and it was like a back bay that had a tight entrance. You went through the entrance in the boat, and there was this big, beautiful bay, shallow. Deepest spot was maybe 4 feet. It was just filthy with giant pike and big schools of white suckers. I felt so bad for these things, because as we stood there and the cameraman was shooting this, there's all these toilet bowl flushes as another sucker died in this thing. And we went to topwater, and they were on it. I was throwing this big black fly. It's called a Weedman slider. That was some of the most fun I've ever had in my life catching pike. It was just, we got to the point where we didn't want to hurt them anymore, and we caught some money for the camera, so we took the hook and we got a pair of pliers and bent it flat, and then cast out, and they would just hang on to it just to get the slow motion takes on this thing. But if you can find where the white suckers, and then, Kyle's done his homework up in his system, he knows where they're going to be. The walleye coming down the river's one, the white suckers going up to spawn and coming back down. We've seen that all over Northern Ontario, and that can be some of the most exciting fishing. And once that's over, and the water temp's starting to come up, and you can always tell because the weeds start emerging, right, Kyle? And everything starts changing in the lake. So probably, I don't know if you want to add anything to what I said there, Kyle, but that's kind of like the transition period in my mind till we get to summer. We get those longer, warmer days, the weeds are starting to emerge, and the insect activity, as the one gentleman was asking about, starts to happen, which brings in the bait fish, which brings in the pike.